This video is going to be a little bit different than most of the videos I make on this channel. Uh, for one thing, it's going to have spoilers for the Stormlight archive. I don't think I'll touch on any other series, and realistically, they're not going to be major plot spoilers. There will be a few, but I'll try and keep it as light as possible. This isn't really for new readers. This is more of a discussion about an established character who I feel the community is unfairly representing in their opinion of what happened, particularly in the Rhythm of War. Lirin has flaws and issues. So here's the Reddit post. It's fine. It's an opinion that I understand people having. They feel like Kaladin and Lirin are running into the same problem over and over again, and a lot of people are very upset with how Lirin treated Kaladin when he was at a very vulnerable point in his life. And I understand that. People are very protective of Kaladin. They're very compassionate about his struggle. A lot of people can relate. I can relate. He's pretty severely depressed and traumatized at this point in the series. And when he's like that, there's a point where he ends up killing in Lirin's surgery, which Lirin feels is an absolute betrayal of his moral code, and really just, it upsets him deeply. And he reacts in a horrible way, in a way that was incredibly destructive to Kaladin at that time. And it was incredibly hurtful. I just want to give some perspective on this because I feel as though I just want to give some perspective on this because I feel like I would have agreed with these people maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And as I've gotten a little bit older, I feel pretty strongly that they're not only being a little bit too defensive of Kaladin's behavior, but also a little too quick to assume that Lirin understood exactly what he was doing and the gravity of it. I'm going to get a little bit personal here. I don't want to share my life story. I'm a person on a screen. I'm not your best friend or anything like that, but like, I actually don't want that. So, the thing you have to remember is that Kaladin is the man he is today, largely because he grew up with Lirin as his role model. And I feel like a lot of the great qualities we see in Kaladin that makes us love him as a character are can be traced back to when he was growing up and learning from Lirin. Because like if you think about Lirin's character, like over the course of his life, we don't know a ton about when he was younger. He met Hasina, he moved, he learned medicine, but he came and he settled in Hearthstone. And he treated people there for free, essentially. He accepted donations, but only enough that essentially they were able to eat and live in a pretty modest house that was just big enough for them to have a surgery, which is incredibly modest, considering the service he was providing, especially. But it's fairly obvious that he is a pacifist. He is extremely jaded because he's experienced how in war, oftentimes the conflict isn't necessary, and it comes down to politicking and powerful individuals playing with the lives of their subordinates. He's incredibly jaded, and I feel like in a lot of ways he actually has the most modern sensibilities when it comes to what he thinks is moral and correct. He is maybe a little too extreme anti-violence for some people, but a lot of people I think would agree that There's way too much war in Roshar. There's way too much violence. A lot of it's unnecessary. And just imagine being a surgeon in a world where your country is constantly forcing wars with everyone, including themselves, over petty little disputes because they've glorified war your entire life. And all you do is pick up the innocent people that come back mangled from this conflict, and you try and put the ones you can back together as well as you can. That's got to be mentally and emotionally exhausting. Like, and he does it all for free. Like, he doesn't charge, would be a better way to put it. But, and he holds to that moral even after Wistio dies, and he ends up with Rashon, who I don't think anyone will defend in his treatment of Lirin and their family, which I think to someone like Lirin, who really seems to value his, not only his town, but his family above all else. And Rashon is going after that directly. That's really, really... It's a great way to antagonize someone who's difficult to antagonize. And even in that situation, when Lirin's put in a position where he could have ended that conflict, he chooses not to go towards the violent route when you could argue it might be justified. Kaladin argued it was justified. And that was kind of the branching point in the story where their two perspectives on the world took different paths. People really like to focus in on Lirin's failings, but they really seem to gloss over his strengths. I think he's one of the most morally upright characters in the Stormlight archive, and people just don't really seem to remember that because they remember how he didn't understand what Kaladin was going through, and they really hold that against him. Like, Lirin practices medicine for free in a town where he really does seem to love the people in it. He obviously cares deeply for his family, incredibly deeply. And through his actions and how he runs his business, and just even how he gives his perspectives to Kaladin, you can tell where his heart generally is. And a lot of the things that we love about Kaladin come from the fact that he was raised by Lirin. Yeah, he got some flaws from Lirin as well, but think about how compassionate, caring, and empathetic Kaladin is. How he is great at triaging situations, and he knows when he needs to do something and will go as far as he possibly can, sometimes too far, in order to do his absolute best to help everyone he can. I 100% believe he is that way because he was raised by Lirin. I feel like Lirin is exactly the same way. I feel like that's why Hasina married him. He's also got a lot of problems, and like I said, I think you see those in Kaladin too. Just think about it. Let's think of some of Lirin's flaws. He's stubborn. So is Kaladin. He can be a little disrespectful towards authority. He's antagonistic even towards them. So is Kaladin. And he's a little bit too rigid when it comes to upholding his moral code, which kind of reminds me of another character whose name starts with K and ends with Aladin. That's kind of his whole conflict. Kaladin's letting his moral code destroy himself because he doesn't feel like he can ever take care of himself. He always has to be thinking about what other people need. And I think, in a way, Lirin sort of does the same thing. And I would say the most important flaw that they both share, for the context of this discussion, that they're both horrible at talking about their emotions. This plays a couple roles. First of all, when you have two people that are really headstrong and have really strong moral convictions, they tend to butt heads really hard. And it results in things getting a little ugly sometimes. It doesn't always have to be that way, and the better you get at communicating when something someone says really upsets you, and you learn to treat that person with respect as you're talking to them, I think it improves, but neither of them do that at all. I feel comfortable saying this because I used to be the exact same way with my mother, and neither of us were very good at backing down when the other person got confrontational and aggressive. Uh, when I was going through difficult times, my mother didn't handle them well, but I also didn't tell her about them. It's not exactly her fault that she couldn't read my mind and understand what I needed when I wasn't giving her any information about what I needed. I was just getting angry and getting defensive. And that's kind of what I see with Lirin and Kaladin here. Kaladin's been through a horrifically traumatic few years. Like, let's go through what he experienced in I think it's around 5 years that he's been away from Lirin, maybe 6. So, he watched his younger brother die. He watched Amaran kill his men. He watched a bunch of slave crews die trying to escape with him. He survived Bridge 4. Like, that's just book 1. And then he watches lots more friends die. He feels like he's failed multiple times. Like, Kaladin's been emotionally and mentally tortured through the last few books, and he's just completely wrung out. And he needs some empathy and some patience. But all that Lirin sees is his son, who Lirin was obviously very proud of and very invested in his future, who not only left home promising to save his younger brother, which I'm sure Lirin understands he shouldn't blame Kaladin for Tien not coming home, but grief does funny things to people's minds, and I'm sure there's a little bit of resentment there because Kaladin promised to bring him back, and then probably even more resentment because Kaladin just didn't come back. So even though he didn't die, which he very easily could have, Lirin, for all intents and purposes, lost a second son. For a long time, at least. Now that they're back together, a lot has changed for both of them. Lirin's had to deal with this grief, but he's continued living. He's tried to make his best of the situation. He still cares for people. He still absolutely hates war. He doesn't really care who's in charge because he doesn't see the difference in the two largely violent coalitions that are both vying for power. That's fair. I don't agree with him, but it's fair. It's an understandable viewpoint. Kaladin always tries to do what is right, but he absolutely believes that the ends can justify the means. He's killed a lot of people. It disgusts him at this point, but he has done it. He has endured an absolute beating. And it's broken him. Lirin doesn't know that his son is broken. Maybe you could argue he should see this, but he hasn't had Kaladin's inner monologue for thousands of pages being read to him, so he doesn't really have the same advantage as we have. And sure, if they'd had a heart-to-heart for a week or so, maybe they could have understood this. And Hasina does understand this a bit better. So, in that sense, I think she's eventually the way that Lirin starts to understand what Kaladin's going through a little bit better. Because she's a little more emotionally intelligent, or a lot more, would be accurate. And she sincerely loves and cares for them both. But Lirin doesn't see it. And it's not out of malice or spite or not loving his son. He just doesn't understand. And how can he when Kaladin doesn't share anything with him? So yes, Lirin is absolutely horrible to Kaladin in a defining moment of Kaladin's road to trying to start maybe piecing his life back together. And it's incredibly hard on him. But when the chips are down, Lirin is at Kaladin's side. He grumbles about it, he acts complainy, because it's really hard to admit that you're wrong. Because it feels like a moral failing on your part. And it's really easy to get defensive, and it's really easy to try and make excuses for why you acted the way that you did. So it's just kind of what's going to happen. I really just wish people would remember that part of the reason we love the characters in Stormlight so much is because they are flawed, and because they feel very human. And Lirin is absolutely no exception to this. If you can love Dalinar after he killed his wife, if you can love Kaladin after he killed hundreds of people, there's a lot of characters in Stormlight that have done a lot of not very good things. And the reason we're okay with that is because we see them growing. Lirin hasn't gotten a lot of screen time, but I feel like in that screen time we have seen his personal growth. He still stands by his moral convictions. They're still somewhat contrary to the opinions of the people in the book, but I suspect that time will be very kind to Lirin in the sense that he is a man that is very caring, very compassionate, very stubborn, but has a very good heart and raised an incredible son that I'm sure is a lot of people's favorite character. And if it wasn't for the fact that Lirin was inadvertently, I do believe it was inadvertent, hurting Kaladin, very few of the people who hate Lirin now, like I feel like that hate word is just way too strong. I was frustrated with Lirin. I was angry at Lirin. But I understood where he was coming from. And that's really the main point I want to make here, is that try and think about how hard what Lirin's gone through has been as well. Because he hasn't come out of this unscathed. And I think that with a little bit of compassion and understanding, it really not only makes you empathize with the character more, but makes you appreciate and enjoy him more. And I think that should be the point. Like, we're all human, even fictional characters. At least in Sanderson's series, they feel very human to me. We just have to remember that even in our own lives, even your absolute most favorite people in the world are going to make mistakes. They're going to do stupid things because we're all human. I'm guilty of it. You're guilty of it. Like, it's just how we are. Being human is really tough, and we're all just doing our best. Even the fake imaginary characters who I happen to be fairly passionate about and felt the need to make a YouTube video defending them. If you've lasted through this rant, thank you very much for listening. I'm more than willing to hear counterpoints in the comments, or if you want to make a video reply or whatever you're feeling. I just felt like this is something that I wanted to share my opinion on in a little more depth than I was able to in a comment on Reddit. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.